I'm 60 years old and I need to say something out loud. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's true. My life didn't collapse. It didn't explode or fall apart or make a sound loud enough for anyone to rush in and help me. It disappeared, slowly, politely, almost respectfully. If you'd looked at my life from the outside, you wouldn't have seen a problem. I had a home, a husband, a routine. I paid my bills. I showed up where I was expected. I smiled when it was appropriate. People called me strong. Some even called me lucky. And I let them, because nothing looked broken. But inside, something was thinning out. I used to believe danger looked obvious. Loud arguments, bad decisions, big mistakes. I thought if I avoided those things, I'd be safe. So I learned to be careful early. I learned how to keep my voice calm, how to choose the option that caused the least tension, how to carry disappointment quietly so it wouldn't trouble anyone else. I told myself that was maturity. My husband Marcos would sometimes ask me what I wanted. Simple questions, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to try, what I thought about changing something in our life, and I'd answer quickly without thinking too hard. Whatever you think is best, I'm fine either way. It doesn't matter. At the time, I thought I was being easy to live with, supportive, reasonable. I didn't realize I was practicing erasure. Fear doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It doesn't say, I'm here to take something from you. It says, let's not make things complicated. It says, now isn't the right time. It says, you've already come this far, why risk it? And you listen because it sounds responsible. So when I stayed quiet instead of speaking up, I called it peacekeeping. When I ignored the feeling that something was missing, I called it gratitude. When I felt a pull towards something more honesty, more truth, more life, I pushed it down and told myself I should be content. That word saved me from a lot of arguments. It also saved me from myself. There was no single moment when I realized I was disappearing, no dramatic wake-up call, just a dull sense that my days were blending together, that I was moving through my life the way you move through a hallway you've memorized, not looking around anymore, just counting steps until it's over. I wasn't unhappy, and that should have scared me more than it did. Because unhappiness asks questions. Comfortable silence doesn't. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning. The part where fear sits beside you quietly and waits. Not to destroy you, just to slowly replace you. Fear didn't arrive all at once. It introduced itself slowly, the way habits do, the way routines do, the way things that feel normal slip into your life and never leave. At first, it felt helpful. It helped me avoid arguments. It helped me keep things smooth. It helped me survive moments that felt uncomfortable without making a scene. When someone crossed a line, fear whispered, "Let it go, it's not worth it." When something felt unfair, it said, "This isn't the hill to die on." When I felt hurt, it reminded me, "You're strong, you can carry this." And I believed it. Because I was strong, I had learned to be. I grew up understanding that as a Black woman, being loud came with consequences. Being difficult followed you. Being emotional got you labeled. So I learned early that survival sometimes meant shrinking your reactions, softening your truth, making yourself easier to digest. Fear didn't create that instinct, it refined it. Over the years, I became very good at reading rooms, at sensing when my honesty might cause tension, at adjusting myself just enough to keep everything calm. And every time I did, fear rewarded me with relief. See? Nothing broke. See? Everyone's still comfortable. See? You handled that well. But comfort has a cost. No one warns you about. I stopped noticing when my needs went unmet because I had trained myself not to expect much. I stopped recognizing when my feelings mattered because acknowledging them felt selfish. Somewhere along the way, I replaced, "What do I want?" with, "What will keep things steady?" Marcos didn't demand my silence. That's important to say. He never told me to disappear, but he trusted my answers. When I said I was fine, he believed me. When I said I didn't need anything, he accepted it. When I said, it doesn't matter, life moved forward without my fingerprints on it. And that's how fear works. It doesn't need villains. It just needs cooperation. Years passed like that. Not bad years. Not tragic ones. Just muted. Predictable. Safe. I watched other people change jobs, move cities, speak their truth, start over. I told myself they were braver than me, or reckless, or younger. I told myself I had responsibilities, history, too much invested to start questioning things now. Fear loves sentences like that. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't pressure you. It waits until later becomes a habit. Every time I felt the urge to do something different, to say something honest, to step into something unknown, fear didn't shut me down. It postponed me. Not now, soon. After things settle, when you feel more sure. Later became my favorite lie. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped imagining different versions of my life. I stopped asking myself what might be possible, not because I had answers, but because asking started to feel dangerous. Like touching something fragile that might break if I looked at it too closely. That's when fear truly learned my name. Because by then, it didn't need to stop me anymore. I was stopping myself. The scariest part wasn't what fear took from me. It was how quietly it did it, without leaving fingerprints. There was no single sacrifice that felt too big, no moment where I said, this is where I lost myself. Instead, it happened in pieces so small they felt harmless on their own. A conversation. I didn't start because I didn't want to be misunderstood. An opportunity I didn't explore because it felt inconvenient. A truth I swallowed because saying it would have made things awkward. Each time I told myself I was choosing peace. But peace, I learned, can be misleading. Real peace has weight to it. It settles you without shrinking you. What I had wasn't peace, it was quiet compliance. A stillness that asked nothing of me and gave nothing back. My world didn't collapse. It narrowed. I noticed it first in how I spoke. I began editing myself automatically, even when no one asked me to. I'd feel a thought rise, honest, sharp, alive, and I'd soften it before it ever reached my mouth, not because someone told me to, but because I had learned that being palatable felt safer than being real. Over time, that editing became my voice. I noticed it in my curiosity too. I used to wonder about things, different paths, different versions of myself. But curiosity requires permission, and fear had taught me that wondering too loudly could lead to wanting. Wanting could lead to change, and change felt risky. So I stopped asking what if. I told myself that was acceptance. Marcos once asked me gently if I ever felt restless. I laughed it off. I said, that's just life. And the moment passed. But something in me stayed awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why that question felt like a threat instead of an invitation. That's when I understood something painful. Fear had trained me to confuse stillness with stability, to confuse endurance with strength, to confuse surviving with living. I wasn't unhappy, and I kept using that as proof that everything was fine. But happiness isn't the only signal that matters. There's another feeling people rarely talk about. It's quieter, harder to name. It's the feeling that your life is technically working, but somehow not touching you. Days began to blur, weeks slipped past without distinction. I could tell you what I did, but not how I felt. I was present in my responsibilities, but absent from myself. And the strangest part? No one noticed. People don't panic when you disappear slowly. They only react when something breaks loudly. So I kept functioning. I kept being dependable. I kept being fine. That word again, fine, became my shield. My explanation, my excuse. It protected me from questions, especially my own. But late at night, when everything was quiet enough for honesty to slip through, I'd feel it. A faint ache. Not regret yet, just awareness, a sense that something inside me was waiting and had been waiting for a very long time. I didn't know what it wanted. I only knew I had been ignoring it. And fear, patient as ever, sat beside me in that silence, not panicking, not pushing, confident that as long as I stayed numb, it would stay in control. Regret doesn't arrive the way people warn you it will. It doesn't kick down the door. It doesn't scream accusations or demand answers. At first, it just watches. It shows up in small, inconvenient moments, the kind you can easily ignore if you want to. A passing thought when you see someone else take a risk you once considered. A strange tightness in your chest when you hear about a life that looks fuller than yours. A question that surfaces late at night, right before sleep, when distractions aren't loud enough to drown it out. What if? I pushed those moments away quickly. I told myself they were pointless, dangerous even. Thinking about what could have been felt indulgent, unproductive. I had built a life that worked. Didn't I owe it to myself to be grateful for that? Fear agreed. It reminded me of everything I hadn't lost. You're not struggling. You're not failing. You're not falling apart. And it was right. That was the problem. Because regret doesn't need disaster to survive. It only needs absence, missing experiences. Unspoken words, versions of yourself that never got permission to exist. Things you didn't do, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't want to risk discomfort. Years passed faster than I expected, faster than they should have. One day I caught myself saying, "That's just the way life is," and the sentence felt heavy in my mouth, like something rehearsed, borrowed. Untrue. I realized I wasn't saying it because I believed it. I was saying it because it made my choices easier to live with. That's when regret stopped watching and started settling in. It didn't make me miserable, it made me numb. I stopped feeling disappointment, but I also stopped feeling excitement. I stopped feeling fear, but I also stopped feeling possibility. My emotional range narrowed until everything felt manageable, predictable, and strangely distant. I had protected myself so well that nothing could reach me anymore. Not pain, but not joy either. Marcos noticed before I did. He said, I felt far away sometimes, not angry, not sad, just distant. I told him I was tired. I told him it was age. I told him it was normal. And again, fear nodded along. Normal is one of fear's favorite disguises. Because normal doesn't raise alarms. Normal doesn't demand change. Normal lets years disappear quietly. One afternoon, I stood in my kitchen and realized I couldn't remember the last time I had felt genuinely excited about something that belonged to me, not a responsibility, not an obligation, not something that made sense on paper, something that made me feel awake. That realization landed softly, and that's what scared me most. If regret had shouted, I might have reacted. If it had hurt more, I might have moved sooner. But it didn't. It waited. And in that waiting, I began to understand the real cost of fear. Not failure, not embarrassment, not loss, but the slow, silent trade of aliveness for safety. There comes a moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, when the stories you tell yourself stop working. For me, it wasn't a crisis, it wasn't a fight, it wasn't loss. It was a sentence I caught myself thinking one morning, it's probably too late now. The thought came and went so quickly I almost missed it, but it left something behind, a heaviness, because I realized how familiar that sentence felt, how practiced, how often fear had used it to close doors quietly, too late to start over, too late to change, too late to want more. Fear loves deadlines you never agreed to. I sat with that thought longer than I meant to, and for the first time in years, I didn't push it away. I let it sit, I let it sting. And something uncomfortable surfaced beneath it. Not sadness, not anger, but recognition. I had been blaming time for choices fear had made for me. I had started telling myself stories that made my stillness feel inevitable instead of chosen. Age became my excuse, responsibility became my shield, realism became my hiding place. And the longer I repeated those stories, the more they hardened into truth. That's when I saw fear clearly, not as something external, but as something I'd been cooperating with. Fear never forced me. It suggested, it waited, it let me believe every decision was mine. I thought about all the times I'd said, I should have known better. All the times I took responsibility for not moving, not speaking, not trying, while fear stood quietly in the background, untouched, unchallenged. That realization hurt more than regret ever had, because it meant I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was a participant. Marcos asked me that evening if I was okay. I almost said yes out of habit. The word was already forming when I stopped myself. My throat tightened. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because telling the truth felt unfamiliar. I don't know, I said instead. The room didn't collapse. The world didn't end. Nothing terrible happened. But something shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt present in my own body. Uncomfortable, yes. Exposed, but awake. And I realized how rare that feeling had become. Fear had taught me to avoid discomfort at all costs. But discomfort, I was learning, was the doorway I'd been refusing to walk through. Not because it would destroy me, but because it would require me to choose. That night, I didn't make a plan. I didn't promise myself a transformation. I didn't declare a new life. I just admitted something quietly, honestly, without dressing it up. I wasn't living the life I had protected so carefully, and for the first time, I didn't rush to make peace with that fact. I let it hurt. Because pain, I was starting to understand, wasn't the enemy. Numbness was. Nothing changed all at once. That's the part people don't talk about. There was no bold announcement, no dramatic pivot, no moment where fear vanished and courage took over. Fear was still there, steady, familiar, reminding me of everything that could go wrong if I stopped playing it safe. The difference was subtle. I stopped letting fear make decisions without me. I began noticing it when it showed up, not to fight it, just to name it, that voice that said, "This will be uncomfortable." The one that whispered, "What if you look foolish?" The one that reminded me how much easier it would be to stay quiet. For years, I had treated those thoughts like instructions. Now, I treated them like information. Discomfort became my signal. Not that I was doing something wrong, but that I was doing something honest. The first changes were small enough that no one else noticed. I spoke when I would have stayed silent. I admitted when something hurt instead of smoothing it over. I let myself want things without immediately dismissing them as unrealistic. Each time, fear protested, and each time, I stayed. Not bravely, not confidently, just present. Marcos noticed the difference before I felt it fully. He said I seemed more here, more engaged, less distant, and that word, distant, hit me harder than I expected, because I realized how long I had been living at arm's length from my own life, Fear had convinced me that courage was loud, dramatic, risky. But what I was doing felt quiet, ordinary, almost unimpressive. And yet, it mattered. Courage, I learned, isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move without waiting for fear to disappear first. Confidence doesn't come before action. It follows it. You earn it slowly, through repetition, through proof, through staying with yourself when leaving would be easier. There were days I wanted to retreat, days when old habits felt tempting, days when staying numb seemed kinder than staying honest. Fear reminded me of how comfortable I used to be, but comfort had cost me too much. I started asking myself a different question, not what's safest, but what's truest. That question didn't always lead to easy answers. Sometimes it led to awkward conversations. Sometimes it led to uncertainty. Sometimes it led to admitting I didn't know who I was becoming yet. But for the first time in years, my life felt like it was touching me back. I wasn't chasing happiness, I was reclaiming presence. And presence, I realized, was what fear had taken first. I didn't become fearless, I became willing to feel disappointment instead of numbness, willing to risk discomfort instead of disappearing quietly, willing to participate even if participation meant imperfection. That choice didn't erase the past. It didn't recover lost time, but it did something just as important. It stopped the erasing. I realized the hardest part wasn't deciding to face fear, it was deciding to notice it. All those years, it hid behind practical choices, behind responsible actions, behind every little compromise I thought I was making for myself. And in the quiet, it grew. I watched it silently take the pages of my life, one small surrender at a time. Marcos noticed it too. He saw the way I held back, the way I smiled without curiosity, the way I said yes when I wanted to scream no. I thought I was hiding it well, but he knew. He didn't say much, just watched me. And that was enough to make me feel exposed in ways I hadn't allowed anyone to feel. I could feel the weight of decades pressing down, the conversations I avoided because they felt awkward, the ideas I shelved because they felt risky, the friends I never called, the adventures I never tried. Each choice had been justified at the time, reasonable even. But in the end, they were bricks, building the walls around my own life. And then, one morning, I noticed the silence differently. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore, it was empty. I realized that in all the years I'd been protecting myself, I hadn't protected the one thing that mattered most, me. Not my reputation, not my comfort, not even my safety, just me. That's when I started small, a conversation I'd avoided, a call to someone I'd lost touch with, a step toward a passion I'd dismissed. Tiny, trembling, hesitant steps, but steps nonetheless. The world didn't fall apart, it didn't explode, it just opened, slowly, tentatively, but enough to remind me what living felt like. Fear tried to whisper again. The familiar, quiet words, wait, not yet, maybe later. And I listened at first, but now I recognized the voice. I named it, I saw it, and then I moved anyway. Courage doesn't roar. Courage whispers, move, speak, try, begin. Marcos and I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the city skyline. He didn't need to say, I'm proud. His presence, steady and patient, said it all. And I realized I didn't need to be fearless. I needed to be present. I needed to participate. I remembered who I was before fear got its hands on me, who I could still be if I allowed myself. And I knew, finally, that life isn't something to protect, it's something to live. Every word unspoken, every risk postponed, every moment of curiosity ignored could be reclaimed step by step, breath by breath. The thing I had feared most wasn't failure. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't even loss. It was realizing too late that I had spent my life protecting it instead of living it. And I couldn't let that be my ending. So I chose differently. Not dramatically, not heroically, just deliberately. One step at a time. One word. One conversation. One action that scared me enough to remind me I was alive. Fear still exists. It always will. But I refuse to let it write my story anymore. I write my story now. With courage, with presence, with curiosity, with life. Because the cost of waiting any longer is too high. And I am done waiting.